Today, we become legends.
So it's been a while since I did the last entry in this series covering Guardians, and I definitely didn't forget I still had to do Hunters or anything, I promise. So to avoid keeping you waiting any longer than the 11 months it's taken me to make this one, let's just jump straight in with every Hunter in Smite explained in 30 seconds or less. Artemis, an ability-based hunter with limited mobility but extremely high burst and sustained damage to compensate for that. One of a handful of hunters that see success in both mid as well as ADC and Conquest. Usually built with a larger power and cooldown reduction focus than most hunters as opposed to attack speed, and plays heavily around his ultimate and 2 for huge bursts of damage in fights. If you like high risk, high reward gameplay, AMC will be great for you.
Boo, you suck!
Anhur. Another more ability-focused hunter, but a bit less so than AMC. Anhur is very aggressive with higher CC than average for hunters and an ultimate that hits the hardest of any in his class. If you have the skill or crowd control set up to land all 8 hits, that is. Anhur is mostly an ADC, but occasionally sees success in mid as well. With a low skill floor but a high skill ceiling, Anhur is easy to pick up but hard to master. But if you can master him and his Pillar Impale combo, you'll be rewarded handsomely. Apollo. A well-rounded hunter with strong single target damage using his 100% attack speed steroid passive. Strong at most stages of the game due to his solid wave clear and the aforementioned steroid for late game, has a global ultimate that can be used for split pushing or making rotations to fights that other hunters simply couldn't make it to. His instant meds is also a unique tool you won't find among other hunters that can shut down channeled abilities like Fenrir's Brutalize for example and keep himself very safe in teamfights. Artemis. A late game focused hunter with some of the strongest basic attacks once she gets there, but a weaker early game with bad clear to offset that. Above average CC for a hunter, mainly coming from the legendary Tusky that can stun a whole team if used right and can be followed up with her vine traps to keep enemies locked in place for several seconds under a barrage of her basic attacks, using her attack speed steroid that's one of the strongest in the game. If you play for the late game and team fights and don't mind a weaker early game laning phase, Artemis is definitely for you. Cernunnos. A versatile hunter that can do almost anything you need from him. This is most embodied in his Shifter of Seasons, which gives him one of 4 different effects to his basic attacks to fit the situation. From lifesteal to extra damage to a slow to protection shred, optimizing this ability is hard but rewarding. This somewhat replaces the traditional attack speed steroid for hunters, so Cernunnos doesn't have one of those, but he's well balanced in terms of early and late game where he can excel in both due to his strong wave clear and sustain in lane, as well as giant AoE polymorph ultimate for teamfights. Charybdis. A somewhat unorthodox hunter with a unique attack chain that fires 3 smaller hits at once periodically. An even split between ability damage and basic attacks, with her one being a unique steroid that fires splinters on hit and her ultimate dealing very high ability damage, if you can land it consistently that is. She's also pretty safe due to her pretty much instant immunity on Whirlpool form that can dodge a lot of abilities. If you find traditional hunters to be a bit samey, give Charybdis a try. If nothing else, she's very unique. Chernobog. A balanced hunter with strong ability damage through his 2-into-1 combo, but also strong basic attacks using his steroid and passive for that extra damage every 3rd basic attack. For this reason, Chernobog can flex into mid as well as the traditional ADC placement. He also joins Apollo in the global ultimate category, allowing him to show up to fights he has no business being in to make the difference when the enemy ADC can't follow him in time. Chiron. A largely ability-based hunter with flex potential in mid, some utility in his small team heal and CC cleanse on his 1. Strong early game wave clear with his 1-into-2 combo gives him high pressure in the laning phase where he can poke down enemies with the auto aim on his 2 and snipe them for the finisher with his 3-shot long range ultimate. Chiron is definitely worth a try if you enjoy more ability focused hunters that rely on power and cooldown reduction more than they rely on attack speed. Cupid. A quite unique hunter with some team healing and one of the strongest teamfight CC ultimates, which is not typical of hunters. The Fields of Love can lock down multiple enemies in teamfights and force their beads and or Aegis for other teammates to land their own deadly CCs. A good balance between basic attacks and abilities with a passive attack speed steroid that is always active, along with Heart Bomb, which is one of the hardest hitting hunter basic abilities there is, and really good wave clear for the laning phase. Danzaburou. A very unorthodox hunter with unique and strange mechanics on nearly every ability. From the weird targeter on his 1 to his mind games of which leaf he is turning into on his main escape ability, to literally turning into a rocket to engage into the team fight, Danza is like Marmite, you'll love him or you'll hate him. In terms of early to late game, he's pretty balanced and can perform at all stages, and while he leans more ability based, he can definitely shred with basic attacks as well using the right build. Hachiman. Leaning ability based using his strong mounted archery ultimate and a dash that can be used aggressively or a stun, Hachiman is a high risk high reward hunter with both his mobility options having utility when burned aggressively. He does have some basic attack prowess though too, with an attack speed steroid, albeit a little bit weaker than most, and long range basic attacks for a few shots using his 1. Hachiman has a lot of outplay potential while being relatively easy to grasp. Heimdallr. A very unorthodox hunter with most if not all of his abilities having some kind of gimmick. Even his basic attacks are unique, being the only hunter in the game with an actual attack chain, giving his final basic attack in the chain 1.5 times the usual damage, while the first 2 hits deal AoE damage around the target. His ultimate can banish a player from the fight for several seconds, while his secondary focus on vision of his enemies gives him a high skill ceiling, along with his extremely unique movement option that can transport him any distance but with a longer and longer cooldown the further you go with it. It takes a bit to get used to Heim, but when you do, he's a very rewarding character to play. Hou Yi. Ability leaning but also strong with basic attacks and highly aggressive, Hou Yi's legendary triple bounce is one of the least common occurrences in the entirety of Smite, but hits harder than most ultimates in the game if you can land it. Just don't expect to ever land it consistently. A snappy jump that's great for darting into and out of the fight, and an ultimate that deals very high damage if you can lock the target in for the full duration using his stun or knockup. Lacking a traditional attack speed buff but compensating with bonus damage per missing health on his enemies using Mark of the Golden Crow, Hou Yi has a playstyle that is unreplicated anywhere else, so give him a try if you like the look of him. Ishtar. A strong hybrid between abilities and basic attacks. Ishtar has the best steroid in the hunter class with 3 different options for close-up, ranged, and wave clear respectively. A strong dash that, like Hachiman, rewards aggression with very high damage and a jump back into safety when used on an enemy god. Ishtar also has above average CC for a hunter with a root, cripple, mesmerize, and stun throughout her kit. Ishtar is very versatile, and while she isn't necessarily the best at any one thing, she can do almost anything you need a hunter to do, most embodied by that legendary overpowered steroid. Izanami. Famed for her laning phase where her AoE boomerang basic attacks provide her the strongest wave clear in her class. Converting this wave clear into poke and pressure means Izanami can be a force to be reckoned with early on. While not usually built ability based, she does still have strong ability damage with her 2 and ultimate that can be hard to land due to no natural setup CC in her kit, but does very high damage when it does connect and silences enemies, preventing their escape from her deadly basic attacks. If you like early pressure and translating that into being fed for the mid game, Izanami is your zombie gal. Jing, the flat out safest hunter in the game and one of the favourites of the pros for that reason. Jing can not only dash out of knockups, traditionally a CC with no way out of it, even beads won't remove a knockup, you have to use it before the knockup hits. Jing also has an ultimate that gives her added mobility and a passive that allows her to fly a good portion of the way back to the lane at high speed, meaning if she takes poke, she can easily recall back to base, heal up and not miss much farm. This safety allows her to survive the laning phase early on very easily and transition to her strong late game where she comes out swinging with built-in crit chance and a safe teamfight. Medusa. A good balance of ability damage and basic attacks with a very strong steroid that poisons enemies on hit, and her legendary ultimate that deals insane damage and stuns if enemies look at her when it goes off. Timing this ability right and masking when you use it, no pun intended, is critical to strong Medusa gameplay. While sometimes flexing into mid, Medusa is mostly an ADC hunter. Neith. The first god introduced to the player in the tutorial, and a fairly simple one outside of her ultimate that is global, deals high damage and stuns her target. Utilising this ultimate to aid team skirmishes in the early to mid game instead of just trying to secure kills with it is crucial for Neith. She's built highly ability based with strong damage on all of her abilities, even her movement ability does decent damage. For this reason she's a very popular mid pick as well as also being common in ADC. Rama. A mostly late game focused pick with a very strong basic attack steroid later on, but can also compete in the laning phase using his astral arrows that make his basic attacks AoE for a limited number of shots. Rama is most known for his legendary snipes using his ultimate that gets a smaller hit area for every shot, with the final one being the smallest AoE in the entire game. Definitely one of the more hype hunters for sure, and another favourite of the pro scene. Skadi. Most famous for the meme of her being 2 gods in one, Xbalanque is Skadi's wolf that aids her on the battlefield by commanding him to attack enemies. Xbalanque is her most defining feature, but Skadi also has a unique CC in her ice that slides enemies around. Most of her abilities interact with Xbalanque as well, such as her 1 making him deal more damage to the affected target, and her ultimate making Xbalanque leap to a target and fully healing him as well. This gimmick is really what draws people to Skadi, so if you like the idea of a pet wolf running rampant alongside you on the battleground, definitely give her a try. Skadi is also more ability based than most and sometimes crops up in mid. Ullr. Arguably the most ability-based hunter who plays more like a ranged assassin at times than a traditional hunter. His infamous axe stun that guarantees his 1 and 3 from bow stance deals absurd damage. Oh, did I mention he's a stance switcher? The only one in the hunter class as well. Ullr switches from axes where he is melee to bow where he is ranged, having 3 abilities in each stance but no ultimate. Ullr is an all-or-nothing, high-risk, high-reward character built entirely ability-based and popular in mid as a result, as well as ADC. Another favourite of the pros, Ullr is my personal favourite hunter to play, and he has a playstyle you won't find anywhere else in the class. As mentioned, playing more like a ranged assassin than a hunter sometimes. And finally we have Xbalanque. with one of the more unique basic attack augments allowing them to split on hit into 2 smaller projectiles that damage enemies diagonally behind the initial target. His partly CC immune dash is also very useful defensively, and his global blind ultimate that gives him some attack speed and an extended range on his basic attacks, while being able to impact a fight that's happening anywhere on the map since it blinds the whole team, is very strong. Xbel is pretty unique among hunters, so if you think he looks fun, I highly recommend trying him out. But that's all I've got for every Smite hunter explained in 30 seconds or less. Don't forget to drop a like on the video if you enjoyed it before you leave, and I'll catch you guys in another one later on. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds.